All right, let's talk about the boy crisis with Dr. Warren Farrell. He is the co-author of this book, The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. He wrote it with John Gray. Dr. Farrell has been named one of the world's top 100 thought leaders by the Financial Times and has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes as well. And he is, I saw this on the, he's like a board member for the National Organization of Women, and I asked him about this, and he has really interesting response when he comes to talk about feminism. Let us listen in. Dr. Farrell, thank you very much for coming on. The book is The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. Very powerful stuff. But why don't you begin? I mean, this is something that is just now kind of bubbling to the surface. People haven't really been talking about it up till now, but what is the boy crisis?
Basically, I started the research on this about 11 years ago when I began to sort of notice that in all 63 developed nations, boys were falling significantly behind girls, both academically in every subject, but especially in reading and writing, which are the two biggest predictors of success. And I saw that they were falling behind socially. Their emotional intelligence wasn't as great. Their physical health was deteriorating. Their IQs were going down. Their sperm counts were getting lower. Their social skills were not as good, and they were more likely to be depressed, not have friends, be withdrawing into video game addiction. Not just video games, which are fine, but the addiction is not. And then they were getting more engrossed in video porn and porn in general. And so, and from this, and most importantly, I started asking, what's the causes of this? And I noticed that developed nations have in common that they have more permission for divorce, and they also give more permission for women being able to have children without being married. So in the United States, for example, 53% of women who are under 30 who have children have them without being married. And so I started looking at these two populations of women who have children without being married and women and divorced families. And I found that some of the people who were divorced and some of the women who had children without being married were doing fine. But that was a relatively small percentage who had a lot of father involvement. And then a significant percentage that did not have a lot of father involvement were doing very poorly. They were having children that were having problems on more than 70 different metrics that I was able to detect. And so while I was ultimately able to identify 10 different causes of the boy crisis, the single most important of those 10 causes was minimal or no father involvement, or what I ended up calling dad-deprived boys.
And this is across the developed world.
Across the developed world, we don't have perfect data beyond the academic data on all developed nations, but it is showing up in every nation we've been able to study. The PISA, the United Nations Studies of Academic Competence, finds it in all developed nations, and then beyond the academic measures, we have just from all over the world, but not every single country. We have different measures of emotional intelligence, depression, suicidal behavior, discipline problems, and so on. And the patterns are amazingly similar. This huge breakdown between the boys that I ended up calling dad-enriched boys. They're actually doing probably by most measures better than our fathers were and better than boys used to do. They're really doing, because in the old days, boys had what used to be called a sense of purpose in being able to know that if you're a boy and you live up to everything you're supposed to do as a boy, you'll prepare yourself in a sense to be disposable as a warrior, or disposable by working so hard at the workplace that you did whatever you needed to do to support your family. And disposability isn't a great sense of purpose, but what was behind that sense of purpose is you were applauded and rewarded for being a hero. Your parents looked up to you. Your father was proud of you. Girls were attracted to you. Guys respected you. And so even though you might die at the age of 18 in the military fighting against the Nazis occupying the United States, you nevertheless were a hero. And heroic intelligence, while It was the opposite of health intelligence. Heroic intelligence is socialization for a short life. Health intelligence is socialization for a long life. And even though it was socialization for a short life, it ended up being a sense of purpose for boys. And the problem is today, we're taking the toxicity from the things that boys learn to be heroes, and we're calling it toxic masculinity, as opposed to recognizing that it is the residue of heroic masculinity when a boy has to disconnect from his feelings in order to say to himself, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. If I die in the process, no problem. If I save somebody, that's the big issue. But not connecting with one's feelings is part of a series of things that we learned as boys and men that was not healthy for us, and therefore is toxic. But just calling it toxic masculinity is pejorative to understanding the serving that men did and boys did to protect their country and to be willing to die before women died. We often say things like women are civil, men are civilized by women. Well, that's true on one level, but the opposite is also true. That the result of us going to war and working in the coal mines allowed women to be more civilized by being able to stay at home and talk with people and talk with children. And so it took both sexes. So the entire way we framed masculinity has led to boys going into college and high school hearing words like male privilege, as opposed to men, our fathers and grandfathers, fulfilling their obligation and responsibilities. And that's made boys feel like I can't even say anything as a boy because I will just be told to shut up. You have male privilege, and that's increasing the toxicity toward boys today.
What's the connection? I mean, part of this just sounds like a dad crisis, which I think is really true and is spreading throughout, certainly throughout the lower classes. It's really interesting that the divorce rate among upper class people is actually quite low and marriage is quite high. But among the lower classes where they need it most, the dads are missing. What's the connection between that and the loss of heroic intelligence, which seems more, unless I'm misreading this, it seems more of a societal problem that society itself is rejecting the sacrificial nature of heroism and of boys.
Yes. So you have in the developed countries, there's permission for divorce and permission for freedom. Where there's that permission for freedom, among the good things that happens is that we are able to say our nation is relatively safe. We don't have to worry about being completely wiped out in terms of having all these boys go off to war. There are more people who died in the Battle of the Somme in World War I than have been lost in all the wars in Afghanistan and so on. And so so that we have fewer men used that way. So we can begin to explore things like not having to be a hero. What's the tension between heroic intelligence and health intelligence? We want our boys not to be so fearful that they just withdraw at the first sign of a threat. But at the same time, we want them to know the edge, the balance between the heroic intelligence and being healthy and taking care of yourself and not calling each other chicken when they're unwilling to do some unsafe activity in order to prove yourself a male. But the boys who don't have father, so all of those things are things that are happening in all developed worlds as a result of technology, as a result of capitalism usually. But then we then have a new set of problems that came from the solution. The solution was development and not having to be preoccupied with survival. But then the freedoms oftentimes freed the families not to be united with fathers. And then that created in the very families that didn't have a sense of purpose automatically built into masculinity. That required more need for guidance from fathers to get boys to a much more nuanced state of, who are you, sweetie? You're a beautiful young boy who has this type of skills, this type of orientation, and I want you to make use of that orientation in such a way that maybe you can do something like write a book, but most people who write books can't make a living doing it. Here's a way to balance the freedom and the creativity of writing a book or being an actor with the ability to make money. That is a nuanced set of transitions that have to be developed in boys. and they can be developed in boys to some degree by women. But as a rule, mothers only do not allow the boy a role model to see what he could be like. If there's a divorce and the father doesn't have access to the son doesn't have much of an inspiration to be a father himself and say, do I really want to be a father and have 2 or 3 children then who then can't see me? And the father's living in an apartment and the mother moves away. And I don't want to be in that situation myself. That doesn't inspire me. And then also my grandfather, he sold product X that he didn't believe in so he could make a living to be able to support me. I really appreciate that from my grandfather and my father, but I don't really want to be doing that. And so in Japan, countries like that, they call this type of training to be an executive, which the feminists call male privilege, they call karoshi, which is death at the desk or death from overwork. So one of the most popular games in Japan is a game called karoshi. And so the person who wins this game, the reward is you off yourself, you kill yourself, because that's male privilege. So this is what I call in the boy crisis the uncommon wisdom of our younger generation. They see that there aren't many ways of being a respected male that also allow one to be one's unique self, one's creative self. And so that catches many. And so where there isn't a father figure to guide boys from the old purpose, the old sense of purpose to a new sense of purpose, boys experience a purpose void. And that combined with no fathers and no male teachers and caregivers. And then if the boy is non-academic, if in the old days, our grandfathers, if they weren't academic in their orientation, they went from, they may have dropped out of high school, but they could have become a good mechanic focused on machinery and use their physical strength. But we've morphed in our society from muscle to microchip or from muscle to mental. And so that morphing to a new type of society that is more mental and microchip oriented means boys have to be educated, because even to be a welder, you have to know physics and chemistry if you want to make more than just a simple wage. And so all of these things have not been addressed in the last 50 years.
Is there a way? I noticed that you are one of the rare men who is on the board of NOW, the National Organization of Women. It feels very much to some of us that what used to be the fight for women's just ordinary rights, human rights for women, has become an anti-male movement. It feels like feminism has become a very aggressive, attacking movement, telling boys, like you said, that they have privilege, telling boys that they're toxic, telling men that they're rapists, all men are rapists, that kind of thing. Is that a problem too, or is that just something that gets played up by the media?
I'm afraid that is a problem, in part because it gets played up by the media. It is definitely a message that goes out there from the women's movement. We have like Me Too, and so Me Too is all the complaints by women about men who clearly overstepped their what any emotionally intelligent man would do. But at the same time, you don't have you don't have a hashtag my role model, meaning my role model was a male mentor who mentored me through, to be the CEO or to be the assistant CEO. We don't have, women saying a great man, hashtag great man who was a husband or a father who helped to be supportive. And so boys are looking all around them, and if they have a perspective on this, if they were at a frat party and they met a woman who came to their frat house knowing that she would be drinking, and the two of them drank and they made love and or had sex, and the following morning the woman realized, my God, her boyfriend from another town was calling, couldn't get through to her, and she said, well, I was at a party and I got drunk and I got raped. And then the boy goes from blaming her to, oh my God, I'm so sorry. What can we do? And the guy goes, well, wait a minute. You said this was perfectly consensual. You were high, but but he's not allowed, if he's in college, he can't even have due process. And so You only because the college could lose as much as $800 million a year in federal monies, which is what Stanford University gets from federal monies. And if they start looking like they're a school that discriminates against women and is insensitive to a woman's complaint, they are in extreme jeopardy. And
Yeah,
so,
that has
yes,
been a real problem. I'm running out of time. But I do want
sure,
to ask
sure.
you this last question. What do you see going forward as some of the solutions on offer? I mean, we can't lose generations of boys. They are so important. I really feel sometimes the way boys go, that there goes the society. What do you think we should be looking at?
Well, first, to get fathers much more involved. Second, to make sure we understand exactly what fathers contribute to the parenting checks and balances. To understand what the tendency of fathers to do, emphasize boundary enforcement, to help with postponed gratification, the value of roughhousing and being able to distinguish between being assertive and aggressive. And so that father involvement and not just the male figure, but the biological father has a huge positive impact. Number two, having males go into schools that have male caregivers, male teachers, male preschool teachers. That's very important. If there's no possibility of getting males involved or fathers involved, making sure that the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts and other, if you're a faith-based person, that you get your boy involved in a faith-based community that has boys and young men's groups with a good, responsible male mentor to facilitate those groups so that boys can express feelings and see that that's something that boys can do. To make sure couples communication, that the ability to communicate and hear each other begins in first and second grade, so that boys learn that it is part of what in Denmark all classes get together and they learn how to hear each other and listen to each other. And so that helps boys not have to withdraw into depression and feeling rejected and then that type of thing.
I'm going to have to stop you there. Very, very interesting. The boy crisis, why our boys are struggling, and what we can do about it. Thank you very much, Dr. Farrell. Really interesting. This thing with fathers is huge, and missing fathers, it is just huge and shattering for boys. And I wish people would talk about it a lot more than they do.